So welcome everyone. I'm James Geniak with Chicago Market, and tonight is the latest in a series of online workshops that we've been doing over the summer and into the fall. And tonight we're going to be learning and cooking some fabulous fall recipes with Charles DeBaa. Charles is a returning presenter. He taught us some knife skills and other kitchen skills earlier in the summer, so really excited to have him back for a interactive cooking workshop. So I see a few folks who are in their kitchens getting ready to cook. That's fantastic. Just the Zoom logistics, everyone's on mute right now, but when we get into the cooking demonstration, you can feel free to unmute and ask a question. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat box as well. And wanted to let you know that we do have a donation feature now, and I'm going to put a link in the chat. So if you haven't donated to support this event yet, and you'd like to, if you enjoy these workshops, it helps us support our presenters, helps us support Chicago Market. So please consider making a donation. And a couple other upcoming things that I want to highlight. We just launched a Thanksgiving pop-up market. So we have several vendors who are offering Thanksgiving-themed products, including turkeys, pecan pies, table centerpieces, apple cider, and then a really cool new addition is a harvest box put together by Chicago Market, featuring several local farmers, and put together a box of really interesting, cool harvest time items. So that's on our event page. You can look for the Thanksgiving pop-up market, and you want to make your order. You can make your orders now, and then we're going to have a pickup event on Sunday, November 22nd. So you can come to Chicago Market or at the Gerber Building location and pick up your items on November 22nd. So definitely please check that out. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jonathan, who is a new Chicago Market board member, and he's going to just tell anyone who's not familiar with Chicago Market what we are and what's happening. So Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, James. My name is Jonathan Hertel. I'm a board member here with Chicago Market. If you don't know, Chicago Market, we are a cooperatively owned grocery store coming to the north side of Chicago. We're really a better food community of people looking for more local, sustainable, connected grocery experience. So we have currently over 1,870 owners, people like you and me, businesses in the community. All of us own cooperatively a share of that market. So we do have a lease for the space in the Gerber Building, like James mentioned. That's at Wilson and Broadway. James and I, the rest of the board of directors, we've been working through a series of feasibility analyses, both operationally with respect to the space and about our capacity to raise the funds needed to open in that spot. We're really, really thrilled. Our consultants at Firebrand have designed an operationally feasible path forward for us. It takes advantages of this really historic, beautiful location and addresses some of the building's sort of unique, weird challenges. If you've seen the space, it's an odd shape for a grocery store. So we hope that we're going to have some announcements coming pretty soon on next steps, but wherever we end up, Chicago Market is and will be a place for people who care about sustainability, who care about their groceries traveling shorter distances with fewer touch points. It's a place for people who care about investing in and keeping their grocery dollars in the local community and hiring locally. So Chicago Market is owned by us, by people like you, and we'll be open to everybody in the community to shop. If you're not an owner already, consider joining us. If you are an owner, thank you for being an owner. Consider making a donation. James has the link there. Consider leveling up your ownership to the cultivating level. Consider volunteering. You almost certainly have skills that we need to help us get open, to help us run events like this and the to market work that's going on. Or just introduce a friend to Chicago Market. Anybody who we can get to join this community is going to help us and help you make this dream a reality and make it happen.
Awesome, thanks, Jonathan. So one thing I forgot to mention is Charles updated the ingredient list earlier today, and we put he has some instructions in there for the recipes. So and that I'm going to put that link in the chat here, but it was also in our 5 p.m. email. So just in case you haven't seen that yet, want to open it up and have some written instructions either on your phone or computer while we're going through the recipes, you can go ahead and do that. So let me put that in the chat box. And I also added information on the donation page, our Thanksgiving pop-up, and the To Market's harvest box. So those links are there too. All right, so let's get to the program, and I'll let Charles introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his background and what we're going to be cooking today. Go ahead, Charles.
Thanks, James and Jonathan. Hi, everyone. My name is Charles Deba. I am the owner and chef at the Levantine Kitchen, which is a catering and personal chef business that I started about 2 years ago. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I hope everyone's doing well and is ready to cook along. We've got some fabulous dishes. I'm certainly excited to be in community with you all, especially sort of in this age of election anxiety, which I'm sure everyone is feeling tonight. So I kind of want to get us started because there's a lot to get through in an hour and a half, and I don't want to run out of time at the end. So let's kind of get cooking. So the two dishes that we're making are a spicy white bean stew with either broccoli, rabe, or kale, and also butternut squash fries with a pomegranate yogurt sauce. So what I want to start out with is making vegetable broth, at least for those that are interested and have the ingredients. I did include it on the ingredients list. If people also have like cartons of vegetable broth, that's also fine, and you can just kind of watch along as others make it. But I'm excited about this dish because it uses vegetable broth, and I guess there's like a lot of, to me, there seems to be like a lot of intimidation about making stock or broth when people are cooking, and there shouldn't be, because it's actually a really easy thing to make, especially vegetable broth, which doesn't need to cook for all that long. Meat broths take a little bit longer and are maybe a bit more labor intensive. But vegetable broth is really easy, 30 to 40 minutes and it's done. You can cook it for longer and the flavor just keeps coming out of the vegetables. But the vegetable broth in this stew is going to make a really kind of a really nice balance of flavors with all the other ingredients, and is going to add a lot of richness to the liquid. So if everyone can grab like either a medium or large size pot, we're going to start chopping some vegetables and just throwing them in this pot. So I've got some celery, carrot, onion, garlic, a little bit of parsley, and that's all I'm using. Of course, other things can be added to vegetable stock. If people have fennel, you can add cabbage is another common one. I'd say those are probably the most common vegetables, so feel free to add other things if you don't have carrots or celery for some reason, or if you have other veggies that you want to add along to carrot, celery, and onion. So I'm just cutting them up into kind of loose chunks and throwing them in the pot. I'm leaving the skin on the carrots because it doesn't really matter. We're not eating them at the end, or you don't have to eat them at the end. So I just chopped up 2 large carrots. I've got 2 stalks of celery here. And again, just chopping them up into like 3-inch pieces, throwing them in. I've got a small to medium-sized onion, which I'm just going to quarter. And I'm taking the skin off. Okay, I've got my skin off my onion. Again, just quartering and throwing in the pot. And I've got a couple of cloves of garlic that I'm going to add. Again, taking the skin off. And then you can either leave whole or half them. Either way, it's fine. So I'm just throwing them in whole right now. And a couple sprigs of parsley. Like three sprigs is probably good. Just to add some kind of earthiness and herbiness. Just ripping them in half. And now a couple of other dry herbs. So I like to add bay leaf because I think it imparts a nice flavor to pretty much to any broth. So I put it usually in meat stock or broth and also in veggie broth. So just a leaf or two is fine if you have bay leaves. A couple of peppercorns. Again, to add, I mean, kind of doesn't add much spiciness, but I just like the flavor that peppercorns add to stock again. So I'm adding like 4 or 5 in there. And the last thing that I'm adding, which is maybe seems a bit unusual, but I added this in the ingredient list just in case people had on hand or if they wanted to buy, but if anyone has prunes or dates, so as you'll know, notice with the other ingredients, there's, I mean, other than the kind of the carrots or if you have a sweet onion, there's not a whole lot of sweetness that's kind of going into this stock. So I'm just going to add, since I have a smaller pot, I'm just going to add 1 prune, which is kind of a trick that another chef taught me that I know. And it adds a really, really nice depth of flavor to, and a little bit of sweetness to the broth, which I really like. And it's really easy if you have on hand. That is not something that you would traditionally think would go into broth or stock, but give it a try if you have them, and you'll notice a slightly sweeter flavor, which is really, I think, pretty nice. So for those following along, I mean, I know some are, I can't see everyone's video, so hopefully people are sort of with me at this point. Oh, thanks. Good to see some new videos. So if everyone's got everything in the pot, I'm just going to add water, probably pretty close to the top of this like medium-sized pot, certainly to cover all of the vegetables. And for our recipe, we're going to need like 4 to 6 cups, and I'll explain the sort of the variation in the number of cups once we kind of get into the recipe and why you might add more or less. But I'm just going to cover this with cold water. Okay, that water's pretty close to the top of this pot, which is fine. I'm going to put this on high heat and bring it to a boil. And I'm actually going to cover it so it comes to a boil a little bit faster. Normally when I make stock, I always leave the pot uncovered, or at least the lid ajar for steam to escape, because the idea of making stock is that you want to reduce the flavor, or sorry, reduce the liquid in order to impart more flavor in your stock. So keeping the lid on while you're making stock doesn't add the same depth of flavor as you're cooking it for long periods of time, especially with meat stock, as it would if you don't have a lid on it. So that's important to keep in mind. And we're not going to add salt for now. So I actually, I pretty often never never add salt into my stocks because it kind of, I use it for a bunch of different things, and the levels of salt that you might want to add to it to a certain dish might be different across different dishes. So I usually keep my stock unsalted and then salt it when I am actually using it. So so I've got mine on the stove. Hopefully everyone's with me and has their stock started on the stove, coming up to a boil. And we're gonna pivot a little bit pivot to the other dish. If everyone can grab their butternut squash, because we're gonna prep this and get the oven fired in a little bit so this can get baking in the oven. So butternut squashes they're a pain in the ass to work with, in my opinion, and that's kind of like why I wanted to work with it tonight, because I mean they're kind of a pain to me, but they're also, I mean, they're obviously really hard. They're a little bit intimidating sometimes to work with, I think, but I think as long as you have a fairly sharp knife, a chef's knife, they're pretty manageable, and a good peeler. So the plan is to just cut these into like fries, like 3-inch long and like 1/2-inch wide fries that'll bake up pretty quickly in the oven. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut off the top and the bottom. And I'm gonna peel this halfway first and then peel it the rest of the way after I cut it. So for some of you that have worked with butternut squash before, it kind of, once you peel it, it gets slippery and hard to manage. So this will make it hopefully a little bit more manageable for you. So I'm peeling about like halfway down, and once I've got this peeled all the way around, I'm going to cut off the part that I've peeled. Okay. So I'm going to set this aside, this other piece, and we'll get back to that in a minute. So for butternut squash, only the bottom half has the bottom third, bottom half has the seeds. So I just peeled the top half. I've cut it in half, and then I'm going to cut these halves again lengthwise in half again. So I've kind of got these like thin, it's like about 1/2-inch slices. Of course, I've got the rounded part here, but that's okay. So I've got it in quarters lengthwise, and I'm going to grab a baking tray here that I can put these on. And again, I'm just cutting these into fairly narrow fry shape. I'm throwing them on my baking sheet. And they don't all have to be a perfect size. I've got some that are sort of less rectangular and a little bit more, I don't know what shape that is, trapezoidal or something like that. So I'm throwing these onto my baking sheet. And once you're there and you've got that half cut up, I'm gonna work on peeling this other half. Okay, so I've got that half peeled. I'm gonna take these peels off my cutting board. The seeds, I mean, of course you can take the seeds and like roast them if you want to. I'll put them aside. I generally don't use them myself. I mean, unless you're making multiple butternut squashes, it may not be worth it. So I'm just gonna compost mine. But if people want to save theirs and roast them, like in the toaster oven or in the oven, that's totally cool. And of course, if people have questions at any point, feel free to stop me. I'm more than happy to answer anything. All right, so I've got my squash hollowed out. Wash my hands.
Zoom.
Again, I'm going to cut these sort of in quarters again, which is a little bit more difficult to do with this section because the bottom is obviously hollowed out where the seeds were, but we're going to make do. And I've got a couple of smaller fries and this kind of hook-shaped one, but that's okay. As long as they're all about the same thickness, that's what matters, not so much the shape. We just want to cook, we want them to cook up evenly. Okay, so I've got all of my fries in my on my baking sheet. How's everyone else doing? Still working? Okay, I'll give people another minute or two.
Charles, do you put anything on the baking sheet?
I don't, because we're going to use oil, so we wouldn't have to worry too much about them sticking. If you want an easier cleanup, you can use parchment paper. There's probably, if you have like silpats or like silicone mats, there's probably no need for them. You're just going to create more cleanup work. So these shouldn't stick too much to the pan.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks like folks are still finishing up, which is okay. We're right on schedule. For folks that are finished, we're gonna make the yogurt sauce next for these fries. So if you wanna grab whatever yogurt you have, pomegranate molasses if you were able to find, and some salt. Those are the ingredients that we're gonna need to make the sauce. So go ahead and grab those on a small bowl will be okay as well. Okay, I'm gonna if folks are still working, that's okay. I'm gonna slowly start putting this together. So this is a really simple sauce that I like to make with this. I think the kind of the tartness of the yogurt and then the sweet tartness of the pomegranate molasses goes really nice with the sweetness, or the hopefully sweetness if you got a sweet butternut squash. So it's a really nice dipping sauce for this. If you weren't able to find pomegranate molasses, there's not, unfortunately, not a great substitute. If you were able to find, like, if you have like date syrup instead, which is another common Middle Eastern ingredient, that would probably work. But there's not much else in terms of, like, maple syrup wouldn't add the like sweet tart balance that pomegranate molasses provides. So if you don't have, that's okay. I think just like a plain yogurt also goes really well with it. So so I've got a quarter measuring cup here, and I'm gonna you know, depending on how many butternut squashes you cut up and how many people you're cooking for, we'll kind of adjust this a bit. So I'm gonna start with half a cup of, I've got plain Greek yogurt here. And I think a cup for me is going to be too much. I know in the ingredient list it said a cup. So I'm going to do 3/4 of a cup for the amount of people that I'm cooking for. Okay, so I've got that in a small bowl. And I've got my pomegranate molasses here. And I'm going to grab a tablespoon measure, if I can find one. And so the ratio that I like is a 1/4 cup of pomegranate molasses to a cup of Greek yogurt. So I've got 3 cups of Greek yogurt in here. I'm going to add 3 tablespoons. So there's 4 tablespoons per in a 1/4 cup. So I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of pomegranate molasses to my yogurt. And my stock just started to boil. So I'm going to go ahead and lower that to like medium low heat. I want there to be like a simmer in there. So you don't want to, you want to see some bubbles going in your stock, but you don't want it to boil over. So my liquid is pretty high in my pot, so I just lowered it to about medium low heat.
If we're planning to just,
Go ahead.
if we're planning to just use chicken or vegetable stock that we already have, should we be heating it, or are we okay if it's just in the
No, you're okay. You're okay.
Okay.
No, you don't need to heat it.
Charles, we had a question in the chat if plum jam could work as a pomegranate molasses substitute.
I think plum jam, you're not going to get the tartness of pomegranate molasses. I mean, that being said, if you want it to be like a sweeter yogurt sauce, that's completely fine. But if you're looking for like a direct substitute of pomegranate molasses, plum jam may not work just because of like the sugar that may be added to it and it being more sweet than tart. But I mean, if you have a plum jam that has a little bit of tartness in it, it may work. So it may just depend on the jam.
Someone else suggests reduced pomegranate juice. I think I did see some recipes online.
Yeah.
People experimenting with making their own pomegranate molasses.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that would work if you're reducing pomegranate juice and you get a sort of a more syrupy reduction from it, that would definitely work in lieu of pomegranate molasses. So I'm just mixing up my yogurt and my pomegranate molasses that I put in. Again, I've got 3/4 of a cup in here of yogurt and 3 tablespoons of pomegranate molasses. I'm gonna add like a pinch of salt to start with, like a quarter, probably a 1/4 teaspoon, maybe 1/4 to half a teaspoon, and mix that in there as well. And like anything we all make, you know, taste what you make and see how it tastes. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more pomegranate molasses because I want it a touch sweeter. It's still a little bit tart from the yogurt, so probably another half tablespoon maybe. And a little bit more salt. And everyone's taste works differently, so you know, recipes are only so good. It's important to, you know, it's important to taste whatever you're making to suit your preferences, I'd say. Okay, so that's more where I wanted at. So once everyone has theirs made, I'm going to set mine aside. Looks like people are kind of finishing up, which is great. I'm going to keep mine, you know, if you want to, I'm going to keep mine in the fridge to keep it pretty cold to serve with the squash once it comes out of the oven. It's okay to keep it out, so, because, you know, dinner will be soon. So. No worries if you want it a little bit more on the room temp side.
Yeah, I think if I keep it out, I'm just gonna eat it with a spoon. It's so good.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it is really great. And it's so simple too. It's really awesome. So let's set our squash aside because we're not going to put it in the oven quite yet, and we're going to preheat the oven pretty soon after this next step. But we're going to move back to the white bean stew, and we're going to start prepping some of the veggies that are going to go in this, or some of the aromatics that are going to go in this. So I've got a like a medium-sized, large-size oven. I see someone asked the question, what temp should the oven be? So we're going to put that to 425. And I'm going to get that preheated in like a couple minutes because we're still a little ways off from putting the squash in. So I'll keep you posted on when I turn my oven on. But in the meantime, I've got a medium large onion, 4 cloves of garlic, and we're going to start chopping these to put in this stew, to saute for this stew. All right, so I'm peeling my onion, and we're gonna want this to be like a pretty fine mince, if you can get that. All right, so I've got my onion chopped up. I'm going to also mince my garlic. Okay, I've got my garlic peeled. So again, just as fine of a mince as you can on your garlic. And rather than cutting garlic more methodically like I would an onion if I'm mincing it, I kind of just like to take the cloves, put them on my cutting board, and then start chopping like this. It goes a lot faster, generally. Okay, so I've got my garlic and onion chopped up. Hopefully everyone's following along pretty close behind me, if not already done. So I've got a large pot set out here that we're gonna make the stew in. Probably, it's 5 quarts. If you've got a little bit smaller or bigger, it should work, so no worries. I'm gonna get this heating on medium heat. And gonna preheat it for a minute or two just to get the pan hot. And then I'm gonna add our olive oil and then followed by our onions and garlic. And if people want to start, if you haven't turned on your oven, now would be a good time since it'll take a bit of time to warm up to 425. So I'm gonna crank my oven on. And I've got my olive oil here. That I'm gonna wait another 30 seconds to get this pan hot. Everyone doing okay? Any questions? Good.
Is it going to throw the whole thing off if we keep our garlic finely sliced?
No, that's going to be perfect. Yeah. No worries. All right, so I'm going to add about a quarter cup of garlic into my pan, into my pot. And feel free to use a measuring cup or spoons if you want, or just eye it. Doesn't have to be perfect. All right, my oil's hot. I'm gonna add the onions and garlic. And I'm gonna give them a mix around. And we're gonna let those onions and garlic cook down for about 5 minutes until the onions start to sweat and get a little bit soft. And we are going to get our tomato paste and beans ready. So I've got two cans of cannellini beans here. If people use dried beans and rehydrated them and cooked them, that's also perfectly fine. I've got some tomato paste and then also a little bit of harissa. So I'm going to use a little bit of both to kind of get both of those flavors. If you have one or the other, completely fine.
Charles, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, good question. So harissa is typically made with either a mix of red peppers and hot peppers, or just all hot peppers and some spices. It's kind of made differently by different brands, and it's fairly largely available now. I mean, there's not much of a reason for. I've made it before, but there's not a ton of reason to make it because there's a lot of great brands out there, and it's fairly affordable, and it stays really well, like in the refrigerator or freezer. So yeah, so that's kind of the difference. You know, one obviously tomato based, so the flavors will be slightly different. But there's also, of course, if you only have tomato paste, there's ways to add heat to your stew if you want to add some spicy heat to your stew, using like chili flakes or red chili powder or even cayenne pepper. So that's always an option if you don't have harissa. Okay, so I've got my tomato paste and beans open. I'm gonna go ahead and drain my beans of their liquid and then just rinse them off a little bit. I'm gonna give my onions and garlic a stir first. My broth is still bubbling away, and it's starting to kind of get a light brown color, which is what we want, which means that the vegetables are kind of releasing their flavor and color, which is great. So I'm going to drain my beans. And rinse them off a little bit. Okay, so I've got my beans drained. I'm gonna check on my onions and garlic again. Give them a stir.
Should we still be on medium heat for that?
What's that?
Should we still be on medium heat?
Yeah, still
Where
medium heat.
Yeah.
Yep. My onions are starting to get a little bit brown, which is what I want. And we are going to, in a minute or two, add the harissa or tomato paste, or both, if you have both. And if you
For
have
that,
harissa, I would taste it. I mean, there's varying levels of heat depending on what brand you get. So this is pretty spicy. You know, like some harissa comes spicy. There's brands that make it mild. So use that as a guide when you're thinking about how much you might want to add if you have it.
Gretchen, did you have a question for Charles?
I did. It's kind of a throwback. For this pomegranate molasses, this is the first time I've bought it, and it is delicious. So thank you. How should we store it?
You can store it in the fridge.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll stay pretty much forever. I've never had it go bad because of how high of a sugar content there is. So it'll stay a really long time. Yeah.
Awesome. I may use it up making this dipping sauce over and over again, but
Awesome. All right, so my onions are pretty much brown right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and add, I'm gonna add so we kind of want 2 to 3 tablespoons of whatever we're using. I'm gonna go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of tomato paste and 1 of harissa. And again, use your judgment on how much you want to add of harissa if you have it. Mine's on the spicier end, so I'm just adding it straight to the pot. And I'm gonna go ahead and mix my tomato paste and harissa around with the onion and garlic until it kind of gets caramelized a little bit.
Charles, would this be a good time to throw in some red pepper flakes if we don't have harissa?
Yeah. Now's a great time to do that if you want to go ahead and add red pepper flakes in lieu of harissa if you don't have, or cayenne pepper, either. I'm gonna let that keep going for another 30 seconds or a minute until it cooks down a little bit more. And I'm gonna add the beans next. So if people can have those ready, that would be great. And this is really such a great like pantry-based dish. Obviously, like tomato paste, you can, again, tomato paste and harissa, you can freeze. I freeze tomato paste all the time. And if you keep it in its can in a fridge like this, it'll be moldy in 5 to 7 days. So if you want to get mileage out of your tomato paste, take a tablespoon, put a parchment paper on a baking sheet, measure out tablespoons, and put them on your parchment, freeze it, and then put it in a container, and then you'll have 1 tablespoon increments of tomato paste that you can use at any time for whatever recipe you want. It's a really good hack, and I've seen too many cans of tomato paste go to waste because I haven't frozen them, and I got tired of it. All right, so I'm gonna add my beans in. And I'm gonna grab, if you have a like a masher, like the potato masher, you don't have to. You can use like the back of a wooden spoon or a wooden spatula. I'm just gonna mash some of the beans a little bit just to kind of release their creaminess. And really, it's just like a couple of quick mashes. Don't obsess over it. Again, I'm just trying to get the creaminess out of some of the beans, so our soup gets a little bit creamier and thicker, which is kind of what we want. I'm going to add some salt and pepper at this stage. So I'm going to start out with like a teaspoon of salt, and we're probably going to add more later. And a couple of like grinds of fresh pepper. Okay, so our broth has been cooking for about probably like 25 or 30 minutes at this point. I'm gonna go ahead and just ladle in like a ladle's worth so I can stop these, so I can stop this tomato paste from cooking, burning, I should say. All right, so I added in probably like a half a cup of broth just to, again, I don't want my tomato paste and harissa to burn on the bottom of my pot. And, you know, under normal circumstances, if we weren't under time constraints, I'd probably have my broth going for a little bit longer before using it because it's probably not as reduced as I want it to be. But, you know, we're working with a 90-minute class and that's completely fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get like a 1 cup measuring spoon, or if you have measuring cups, that's also probably even better. And I'm just going to take a ladle and measure out 4 cups in my measuring cup here. Okay, so I just added 3 cups to my pot of beans, and I'm going to measure out 1 more cup, which is based on the amount of water that I put in. That's probably about all I've got left. So I'm just going to pour it into my measuring cup and use my ladle to hold my vegetables back. All right, so I've got another cup there. I'm going to turn off my broth right now because I've got no water in my pot left. I'm going to add this last cup in. So I've got about 4.5 cups in there. I am going to, well, actually, so if people have made more broth, that's fine. You can keep it going on the stove and cook it down a little bit longer. I showed you in the ingredients that it's an option to add pasta into this soup if you wanted to make it a little bit more hearty. If you do, that's completely fine. I'm not going to do that, but if you want to add pasta, I'm going to give you instructions for that later. But you might want to add a little bit more broth in there, probably like upwards of 6 cups, because the pasta is really going to thicken and absorb your water once you add it. So yeah, word for the wise, if anyone wants to add pasta, add probably upwards of 6 cups of broth if you've made it. If you don't have any leftover broth, then you can add water, which is completely fine. So I've got my I've got my broth in. I turned up my heat a little bit, probably like medium high. I want to bring this to a boil. So while that comes to a boil, I'm gonna return to my butternut squash. And I know I see people still working, which is totally fine. So I'll give people a minute. If anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. Okay, just to keep us on track, if people are still working, that's okay. Continue working away on getting the things you need in your pot of beans. I'm gonna go ahead and I've got my tray of butternut squash in front of me. I'm going to take some olive oil, a couple of tablespoons probably, and just eye it out. Or you can just take a tablespoon measure and add a couple tablespoons. And I'm gonna add some spices as well. I've got some cumin here, as well as some chili powder. So I'm gonna add a teaspoon of cumin. And you can just sprinkle it on top. And half a teaspoon of chili powder. If you have red chili powder, that works best. If you have a different kind of chili powder, that's also fine. I'm gonna also add some salt, a teaspoon of salt. I'm using kosher salt. If you have sea salt, that's also fine. Okay, so my stew is at a boil. I'm gonna turn down the heat. You know, the liquid is already pretty hot if you were making broth along with me, so it came to a boil relatively quickly. So I'm gonna let that cook down for about 10-15 minutes until it gets a little bit thicker from the beans, and we'll kind of get back to that stew in a minute. But I've got my oil and spices and salt on my butternut squash. I'm gonna use my hands. If you want to use a spoon, that's also fine, but this is kind of easier to get everything incorporated. And if it's looking a little bit dry, feel free to add a little bit more oil. And before you throw it in the oven, make sure the squash is like evenly distributed, and try and make sure that they're not overlapping to the extent possible, so that they cook kind of evenly and brown nice and evenly. And I'm gonna add a touch more oil. Mine are looking, after mixing it, a little bit dry. Probably another teaspoon, 2 teaspoons maybe. And give it a little bit of a shake around. And my oven is nice and preheated. It's been preheating for about 10 minutes probably, so It's at 425, so I'm gonna throw these in the oven. Like middle rack is fine, doesn't have to be on a, doesn't have to be on a specific rack. And I'm gonna keep time on that, so about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. They should be ready to go. How are people doing? Still catching up? Okay, see some thumbs up. Thumbs up, great. We are going to prep the rest of the things that we need for the soup. So let me kind of ask this question. I took a couple of eggs out because an option for the soup is to add like medium boiled eggs. Is anyone interested in doing that, or we're planning on doing that? Because I'm happy to kind of show you I mean, it's not a difficult technique, but I'm happy to do that alongside with people if people are interested. Yeah?
I'm game to try it, yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so if people are game to try it, grab a small pot. Go ahead and fill it probably about half. So I've got a like 5 or 6 inch high pot. I'm gonna fill it probably about like 3 inches. We just wanna make sure the eggs are covered by the water. So about halfway. All right, I'm gonna put my pot of water on the stove. By the way, for people that are making broth and like have leftover broth, it freezes really, really well. It'll stay for months, which is what I do with broth because it probably stays like 6 to 8 days in the fridge and then it kind of starts like getting funky. So put them in like quart-sized containers. If you have quart-sized containers, like your leftover broth, freeze it and take it out whenever you need it, put it in the fridge overnight and it'll be liquid again in the morning pretty much. Or you can just like add the frozen brick to a pot, put it over the heat and it'll melt in like 3 to 4 minutes over the stove. So that's again, like I'm a huge proponent of freezing things, especially with the pandemic. It's a great way to get like extra mileage out of your ingredients and be going to the store less, which is kind of what I'm trying to do, especially because COVID's pretty bad right now. So, so just a tip for people that have leftover broth. All right, so I've got my water on the fire. I'm gonna put a top on my pot so it comes to a boil quicker. I've got it over high heat. And I'm gonna clear my cutting board and we're gonna prep, if you have kale or broccoli rabe, we're gonna prep that right now. Obviously pretty simple. So I've got kale, like a large bunch of it. I'm just gonna go ahead and wash it. By the way, like pretty much any leafy green works in this soup. So if you have like chard or collards or turnip greens or even spinach, like anything would work. But I kind of like the hardiness of kale and also broccoli rabe. So I'm going to kind of just loosely cut our kale, and I'm going to cut the, where the bottom of the stem is. We don't want to get rid of that. It's edible, and it just needs to cook a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim the bottom kind of more finely, and then as I work my way toward the top where the stem is thinner, I can kind of get bigger chunks of kale, about like an inch or 2 inches, and that'll be the right size for our soup. If you want to go ahead and put the stems in like a separate small bowl, we're going to add those first so that they cook a little bit longer. And feel free to work with like multiple leaves at once so it goes a little bit faster.
Hey, Charles, I got these little broccoli rapinis.
Yeah.
So should I put the broccoli heads in with the stems?
Yeah, you can put the broccoli heads in the stem with the stems. Yeah, those will take also a little bit longer to cook than the leaves. So yeah, that's a great point, James. Thanks.
And if I have something more like a curly kale, can I just kind of rip the heads into pieces, or is there a certain size we're looking for?
No, not a certain size. Yeah, feel free to use your hands to rip stuff into pieces. That's totally fine. All right, so I've got my kale chopped up. I'm going to go ahead and put that in a bowl so it's off my cutting board. And I also want to chop up some parsley, which again adds like a nice herbiness to this stew. If you have cilantro, that'll also work if you don't have parsley. I've got like a smallish, medium-sized bunch, probably like a cup's worth of parsley. And the way that I like to chop herbs, if I'm like finely chopping them, is to just fold over the top. So you've kind of got one big bunch, fold over the top toward the stems, put it straight down on your cutting board, and start moving your hand down and finely chopping the parsley. And parsley stems are fine. First of all, they're not being eaten raw, they're going into a soup, so they're gonna get a little bit softer. And parsley stems in general are edible and shouldn't be thrown away. The bottom stems, maybe a little bit harder, especially if you're eating raw. But this is like great for stock, for veggie stock or whatever stock you might make. One thing that I failed to mention before, so I pretty much never, when I'm making veggie stock, I have a gallon-sized Ziploc bags in the freezer that I put vegetable scraps into like at all times when I'm cooking. So carrot, fennel, celery scraps, like the tops and bottoms, all go into the gallon-sized bag in my freezer. Same with parsley stems. Same with like the ends of onions. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But like I cook all the time because I'm a chef for my job and also because I love to cook. And so I'm pretty much I have like two 2-gallon size bags in my freezer at all times, and they're generally almost always full. And there's almost never a reason, for me at least, to use fresh whole vegetables when I'm making stock, because I have the peels of carrots, I have the ends of carrots, the ends of celery, and it ends up amassing into cups worth of veggie scraps that can just be poured into a pot, pour water over it, and it's like using fresh vegetable. I mean, it's pretty much like using fresh vegetables, because I freeze them pretty immediately after I use them. So that's, again, a great, very, very cost efficient, definitely cheaper than buying at the store way to make vegetable stock, is to save your scraps. And if you have room in your freezer and you have Ziploc bags, it's super, super easy. So keep that tip in mind. So I'm checking on my water for the eggs, and it's almost at a boil. I've got my kale and parsley chopped up, and I've got a lemon here, which we're going to add a little bit later. So I'll keep that on the side as well. I'm going to give my beans a mix. It's definitely starting to thicken up a bit, which is what we want. I'm also, while waiting for the water to come to a boil for the eggs, I'm going to check our butternut squash real quick. They've been in the oven about 10 to 12 minutes. And I'm just going to give them a quick mix, probably, see where they're at. So it's starting to get a little bit brown, but still a little ways to go. Starting to soften up a bit. So just a little mix, and I'm popping back in there. Everyone doing okay? Cool. All right, so my water is boiling for my eggs. I don't know if people are at the same place. I've got my eggs. I took them out a little bit earlier, so my eggs are pretty much at room temperature. If you just took your eggs out of the fridge, that's completely fine. They're just going to end up cooking for a little bit longer. So I'm going to turn my my temperature on my water down to about medium, where there's still a little bit of a simmer going. And the way that I like to lower eggs into water is to use like a slotted spoon, or if you have like a small fine mesh strainer, that'll also work. You don't want to just drop them in there because they can crack when you're dropping them in there. So slowly lower them down one at a time. And I'm going to start a timer immediately for 6 minutes. And you know what I like to look for when I'm boiling eggs, whether I want like hard-boiled eggs or medium boiled, is to just kind of have a few bubbles floating to the top. You don't want to see still water where there's like no movement at all, and you don't want a rapid boil, which will cook them too quickly. So the best way to do it is just to take a look at your water and slowly adjust the temperature until you've got your water at a movement level that is kind of like a slow, very, very slow, steady simmer. And I set my timer for, again, 6 minutes. If you took your eggs out of the fridge and they were still cold, for medium boiled eggs, like 7 minutes, 7.5-ish is probably more the time that you want. You know, there's so many factors that go into like making a perfectly like jammy medium boiled egg. I mean, the size of the egg matters, the temperature of the egg matters. All of these factors come into play. But you know, we're gonna estimate it and do as best we can. But you know, 6 to 7 minutes is generally kind of the zone that you want. No reason to move your eggs around. Just leave them in there, still as can be. And I'm gonna get a bowl of ice water ready because we want to throw these eggs into ice water immediately when we take them out, so that they stop cooking. So if you, hopefully you have ice. If you don't have ice, just get as cold of water as you can, and we'll work with that. All right, so I've got my water icing down. I've got about a little under 3 minutes left on my eggs. I'm gonna give my beans a stir again. And at this point, they've probably been going for about, I want to say like 15, 20 minutes, probably 20 minutes. So that's kind of the time that we want to add. If you have like stems from your broccoli rabe or kale or chard or whatever you're using, you can go ahead and add those in. If anyone wants to use pasta, after these stems cook down a little bit, you're going to want to bring your liquid up to pretty much a boil, and then go ahead and add your pasta and cook it very much as you normally would cook pasta in just regular water if you're making like spaghetti with tomato sauce. You might want to cook it for maybe a little less time than like a package would recommend, because it's you're not taking the pasta out of liquid at any point. The pasta is staying in the liquid and will just keep cooking in the liquid. So that's my recommendation if you wanted to add pasta. I wouldn't go too heavy on the pasta. If you like put a pound of pasta in there, you're going to end up with pasta and not a soup or a stew. It'll just absorb all the liquid. So careful, be moderate in how much pasta you add if you do want to add. All right, I've got under a minute on my eggs. And I'm going to take my eggs out the same way that I put them in, using a spoon, and then drop them into my ice water, and they should cool down very, very quickly. And once cool or warm, you can go ahead and take the shell off, and you should hopefully have a jammy egg. So I'm pretty much right at about 6 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and take my eggs out. Okay, I've got my eggs in ice water. I turned off the fire on my water. that my eggs were in. And my stems of my kale have been going for about 2 or 3 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and add in the leaves. And these will cook down pretty fast, I'm hoping. Broccoli raw leaves should cook down even faster than kale. Kale is like a little bit thicker and tougher, so might need a little bit more time in cooking in your liquid. We're gonna wait to add in the parsley. I'm gonna cut a lemon in half.
Before we add the leaves of the kale or whatever, should we have already done the pasta?
Yes, I would do the pasta first and then add the leaves. Yeah, add the kale in. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. And again, if you're adding pasta, I would probably take probably like 3 minutes off, 3 or 4 minutes off the cook time for whatever is the recommendation, and add in the kale leaves like 3 or 4 minutes before your pasta is ready, if that makes sense, so that your pasta continues to cook when you throw in the kale. All right, so my kale's cooking down. I'm gonna check my butternut squash again to see where we're at with it. So I'm getting pretty close on my butternut squash. I'm gonna take a fork and just check where I'm at in terms of tenderness. Yeah, some of the thicker pieces are still a little bit hard, so I'm gonna put them back in maybe for just a couple minutes more, maybe like 3 or 4 more minutes, and then they should be ready to go. So I'm gonna give, I know we're getting pretty close to time. I'm gonna give the eggs just a minute more, and then I'll crack one open and see kind of, hopefully I've got a nice jammy egg that we can then add to our stew. But I think we've got all of the remaining components if people need to jump off right at 7:30. The one thing that I don't have out that I really love to add to this is feta cheese. If you have feta, if you don't have feta and you have like Parmesan or Pecorino, that would also work really well. So I just like to kind of garnish the feta on top. Same with the parsley. I like to add a little bit of the parsley in, incorporate it into the stew, and then add more fresh parsley on top. And then when the stew is done cooking, when the kale is like cooked down, I add at least a half a lemon, and maybe more if you like more of a lemony flavor. And that's pretty much it. Again, check your salt levels. We didn't add salt into the broth, so we definitely want to check salt levels and see if we're where we need to be in terms of saltiness. And yeah, this stew should have like a nice balance of flavors, like nice fresh earthiness from the parsley, a little bit of spice from the harissa, red pepper flakes, sweetness from the tomato paste, if you put tomato paste in, creaminess of the beans. I mean, it's a really nice balanced dish that I hope you all enjoy. And then, you know, of course, adding like pasta or eggs just like kind of brings it up to a different level. So I'm gonna go ahead and just crack one of these eggs just to see how we did. My egg is pretty cold. I like cracking eggs like under running water, like a stream of running water, which makes it really easy to take the shell off. Otherwise, it's a kind of a pain. All right, well, I tried to peel my egg too quickly and then I kind of like somewhat ruined it, but my white is nice and firm, which is what I want, and I want a runny yolk. So I'm gonna just like cut this in half and show you. So I've got this nice, if you can see it, kind of like firm white and then jammy runny yolk, which is what I wanted. Again, if you cooked it for a little bit longer, it might be a little bit, the yellow might be a little bit firmer, which is perfectly fine. If you wanted it hard boiled, I hope you left it in longer, upwards of 10 or 11 minutes. That looks good, James, yeah. So I'll keep that egg on the side and then like add it to the top. You know, the yellow yolk will give it nice like sweetness and creaminess to the stew. And my stew is pretty much ready. I might cook it for a couple minutes longer to get that kale a little bit softer. I'm about to take my fries out of the oven, and those will be ready to eat once they cool down a little bit.
Are you going to add parsley to the stew?
Yeah, so I'm going to add about probably like half of the parsley, and then I like just garnishing the rest of it on top, and then kind of serving it like that. So yeah, my fries are definitely soft and cooked. So I'm gonna let those cool down a little bit, and then serve it with that great pomegranate yogurt sauce. And that's pretty much it. I'm actually gonna taste my stew real quick to see what the flavor of the broth is like. So it's got a nice spiciness. It needs a little bit more salt, maybe about like another half to 3/4 of a teaspoon. So I'm gonna add more salt. I'm gonna add half a lemon. And I'm gonna go ahead and taste again. And yeah, that's like right where I want to be. So I added just another half teaspoon of salt and a half a lemon. And that's kind of the flavor profile that I was looking for. If you want to add more lemon, you should definitely do so. Lemon's awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and just add in some of the parsley, mix it in, and then I'm pretty much ready to serve. I'm going to put a little bit more parsley on top. So sprinkle some feta and then put an egg on top of it, and that we're pretty much good to go here. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that people have, if you have any. I can also leave people to go eat. I know people are probably hungry and I think everything's probably ready for you all. So also totally fine if you have no questions.
Yeah, I'm definitely ready to serve this up. This is fantastic, Charles. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially learning about some new ingredients. It's really helpful. And if folks, as you plate up your meals tonight, take a couple photos, and I'll send out the link to the recording to this session, and you could just reply and attach your photos, and maybe we'll do a little social media post, everybody's dishes. So
totally, that would be great. And yeah, for people that want to follow along with what I'm doing for my business, the name of my business is the Levantine, Levantine Kitchen. I do catering, but like obviously not so much catering these days. The pandemic has been really, really rough on my business. So I've been doing a lot of cooking classes, and I'm hoping to offer more. I was offering more earlier in the year, and then summer hit and people wanted to be outside and didn't want to be cooking inside. But now that it's getting cold out, I'll be doing a bunch more cooking classes. So feel free to go on my website and sign up for my newsletter. Follow me on social media, on Instagram or Facebook. And hey, I really enjoyed cooking with everyone, and I appreciate you all being here. And it's great to be in community with people that believe in what Chicago Market is doing. And I hope everyone enjoys the food and has a great night.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. Everybody enjoy.
Absolutely.
Check out our Thanksgiving pop-up market, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.